Number 6. The one everyone thinks is bullshit. The Underground Duchy.
What is up, gamers? It is your boy, Icarus Pizza here today. And on this beach, I am vengeance. Because today, I finally get to make my Dark Souls 2 style video, where I try to convince you, yes you, the viewer and jury, that something that is generally viewed unfavorably, the moles, are actually pretty good. You see, before I published my Vagabond video, I did a lot of thinking about how after I published this piece of media, it's kind of just out there forever. And even though the root community is kind of small, and I'm an even smaller creator, the things that I say can certainly have a ripple effect on how that faction and even the entire game is viewed. Something that plays in my head a lot is I kind of harped on the Vagabond being overpowered in that video, and that's not really something I believe anymore. And while I still think the rest of the video is solid, it does kind of play in my head that that's just out there now, so that kind of sucks. I've seen comments where people say that they just remove Vagabond from the game entirely on both YouTube and Reddit, and that just makes me kind of sad. Like, I don't even hate the Vagabond that much. I'm not even that big of a hater. For what it's worth, I wasn't the first person to call Vagabond kind of silly, and I certainly won't be the last. But I do think shitting on them so hard was kind of low-hanging fruit. So today, I want to do the opposite of that video and talk about why I appreciate the moles more than the average root player, and especially more than the average competitive root player. As you'll come to see later in the video, I really do think there are valid criticisms of this faction. Like, I get the hate. I understand why they are like the villain of the community. But I really do think this faction has a lot of really beautiful, like, chaotic bullshit that goes underappreciated, and I'd like to share that with you all today. So without further ado, let's dig right into this faction. Court is now in session, gamers. I needed a gavel, bro. Like, such a missed opportunity. So who are the Underground Duchy, and what makes them so hated? The moles are a faction that believes the foreign creatures of the woodland would be better off as subjects. In order for the moles to successfully conquer the woodland, though, they'll need the support of their ministers. With their approval, the moles can get access to more resources. If things start going badly for the moles, however, they'll lose their lobbyist support and be publicly roasted and reacted to for years to come.
What the fuck? Yo!
The moles are what us League of Legends players would call a scaling faction. The longer the game goes on, the stronger the moles get. Playing as the Underground Duchy is a game of trying to figure out how to get your snowball so big that even 1v3 you're unstoppable. While playing against the Duchy is all about making sure that snowball never gets to that point. What makes moles so controversial is their strength. They're usually seen as one of the strongest factions in the game, if not the strongest. When I started making these videos, which is over a year ago now, I ranked Vagabond as the best faction in the game, but after an entire extra year of League play, I'm willing to admit that moles probably are, in fact, the best faction in the game, at least consistently. Vagabond has the capability to become completely broken. Like, Arbiter can truly become the chosen undead and like kill God, but moles are just like consistently brokenly strong. But what makes these dirty little cuties so broken is just how much utility they bring to the table. The moles are able to do just about everything and are able to do it all pretty well. Excuse me, Your Honor? I would like to bring this discussion down to the burrow, please. Moles get their very own clearing to chill in, called the burrow. Other players can't enter the burrow, allowing the mole player to safely be able to build up their army there, and then move said army basically anywhere. And I really mean anywhere. Digging allows the mole player to spend a card in order to place a tunnel in any clearing matching the spent card's suits. Tunnels are considered adjacent to the burrow, so you can move moles from the burrow directly to any tunnel, and vice versa. Luckily, digging also gives you a free move action of up to 4 moles. So remember all the time I spent praising the cool and unique ruling structures that cats and lizards created in my last 2 videos? Yeah, you can throw all of that out the window because I'm with the gang. The burrow and its tunnels are one of the more common subjects of criticism that will come up when discussing the duchy. They allow moles to mitigate losses by simply moving back into their crib. Since the burrow is effectively invincible, it allows mole players to play a somewhat safe and non-interactive game if you allow them to. If moles get left alone, they'll be able to build up a huge action economy through their ministers, which allow them to play a variety of different strategies. While these strategies vastly differ in the mid-game, they mostly all share the core of Brigadier and Mayor, which basically allows you to beat the shit out of anyone, hopefully Vagabond.
Fuck it, I don't want to play.
In short, the design of moles as a faction promotes non-interactive turtling, which eventually leads to them either establishing their fuck you clearing or becoming the best insurgent faction in the game, Smol Mole. Regardless of what strat the mole player goes with, they'll gain VP like it's goddamn cookie clicker, leaving the other factions of the woodland in the dust. Mole's willingness to not interact, combined with their scoring potential, gives them their reputation as perhaps the most problematic faction in the game.
So now that you have some context as to why my client is generally viewed unfavorably, I think now would be a good time to start talking about what I really like about them.
From a faction design standpoint, I find swaying as a core mechanic to be really intriguing. The core theme of moles, I'd say, is their adaptability, I guess. The average mole game starts with players playing Smol Mole, and they either stick it out as Smol or pivot towards a building strategy.
For all of my employed viewers, Smol Mole is a mole strategy where you never build, and you mostly score by taking cardboard and using Duchess of Mud. Swole Mole is a mole strategy where you get tons of warriors on the board through citadels, and Mole Mart is a strategy characterized by heavy card draw and crafting through markets.
A good mole player won't go into a game with a set strategy. They'll play the first turn out, evaluate the board state, and then start swaying accordingly. When swaying ministers, there are 2 variables you have to consider. The first is the board itself. Matching cards to clearings you're in should be easy enough at the start of the game, but once players start playing whack-a-mole, just getting to where you want to be can become a bit of a chore. The second variable you have to consider is who you're playing against. The faction mix of the game will help determine what strategy you should play out for the rest of the game. Is it a pure Smol Mole game? Are we getting fucking ripped with Swole? Or are we hitting up the Mole Mart? The answer to these questions will determine which ministers you sway when, and if you plan well, you'll be greatly rewarded. On the other hand, there's also a bunch of room for error. One of the worst feelings on moles is going through a turn and not taking full advantage of all of your swayed ministers. It's like the game is intrinsically telling you, hey man, if you're not gonna move on turn 3, why the fuck did you sway Mayor on turn 2? You know you just wasted actions, right? Each minister provides a little piece of utility, and you're not gonna be able to sway them all, making the order in which you sway your ministers quite a heavy choice in my opinion. Now, to be fair, I know a lot of players would disagree with that sentiment. Moles have been out for quite some time now, so standard strategies have been developed for them. Many mole games will start with players swaying Brigadier and then Mayor, with little to no thought going into that choice
at all. However, in a Marauder meta, I feel that players can no longer as easily execute copied and pasted swaying orders. Rats and badgers will fuck your shit up personally early in the game and then drop a Valorant spray in your clearing that they just wiped you out in. Due to this, I feel you have to be much more adaptable to play moles than you used to have to be.
Sway.
Which breathes some much needed new life into Underground Duchy strategy. Now, on one end, I do feel it's a bit ridiculous that moles can be super militant with Swole, basically an insurgent faction with Smol, or become one of the fastest scorers in the game with Mole Marts. On the other end though, since so many options are available to the mole player, finding the correct one can be very exciting. When I play moles, I get giddy just thinking about the amount of directions I could take the game in. And as I've gotten a stronger and stronger game sense, I've felt more and more rewarded coming back to the moles, which I think is pretty cool, at least to me.
Another thing I find really interesting about the moles is how they break the conventional mold of what a militant faction is. While this is a point of criticism for a lot of other people, it's generally a highlight for me.
The moles overall don't have a ton of board presence, but the board presence they do have, they'd really love to keep. For one, I think this shows off the moles' lore in a unique way. Remember, the moles are coming up from like hell or whatever and have to do a ton of lobbying to make sure they can continue funding their trips to the surface. The more lobbyists they get on their side, the more they can make you feel like you're alive in America in 2025. Holy shit, send help! You can see this naturally progress through their gameplay. At the start of the game, I'll have a sparse number of moles on the board, but as the game goes on, I'll hopefully be able to build my fuck you clearing, which to me has always represented the above ground mole capital. It makes so much sense to me that a colonizing, greedy faction such as the moles would sit all of their pieces in one clearing and just score that shit repeatedly until the cycle of extreme capitalism just breaks the game, and now the 1% owns most of the VP, and now fucking Jim Bob Sherwood, who's living in this forest, can't pay his rent. And mechanically, I find it pretty interesting too. I think a militant faction whose win condition centers around creating one giant mega clearing is actually pretty clever. If you look at the militant factions, you have one that wants to build many buildings across a bunch of clearings, one that wants to build a single building in each clearing they are in, one that is constantly putting down buildings, picking them up, leaving, and then putting them back down, and one that just wants to kill as much shit as possible. It's cool to me that Mole's design is not centered around spreading out or moving a lot, but rather how well you can defend one thing. It's a subversion of what a militant faction needs to be, and opens the door to a lot of weird decision making. Me, being the greedy player I am,
Bust, Connor. I'm busted.
I'll often limit test the amount of moles I can use from my fuck you clearing for policing, picking up cardboard, and to be my personal Uber to your mom's house. Hey!
Now that I've given you a pretty good sense of my client's character, I think now would be a great time to try to disprove some of the allegations brought against them.
Beat him up! Beat him up! Beat him up! Beat him up! I was seeing double in a...
Objection! Objection! I mean, cut it with the anime edit shit. I mean, what is this? We're in court. This is serious. Jesus Christ. When you really boil it down, the Smol Mole strategy is pretty straightforward. It's just to never build. Why? It's because building is potentially cringe.
Loud cheers.
This is actually worse than I could have imagined.
When moles lose a building, they have to pay the price of failure, which is losing both a card and a minister of the highest tier that the player has.
Dude, where was the last place I had this citadel?
By not building, the mole player effectively loses a way to keep them in check. A lot of players, and especially newer players, really do not like this. The two main points of contention against Smol Mole I usually hear is that it is 1, unintended, and that it is 2, super boring and uninteractive. I'm going to start with the artist's intent, because when evaluating the faction's quality, hot take, I think it's a little irrelevant. Okay, hold on.
Before you write that comment, I do want to clarify that I do think intent matters in design and art. Like, if you were to intend to make a piece of art that was super problematic, like, obviously I would have a problem with that. More so what I'm trying to get at is, when you design a game or a faction, just because you design something to be interacted with in a specific way doesn't mean that players are always going to interact with it in the specific way that you want them to. Often players will find fun and strategy in ways that you never intended, but I don't think that that means the original design is bad. If anything, it could go to show how strong the foundation of the original design is and how malleable it can be.
For what it's worth, I do agree that Smol Mole was most likely unintended. In fact, in the Underground rulebook, it literally says, and I quote, "Ultimately, the duchy will need to construct markets and citadels to justify their conquest and gain support from woodland separatists."
So that was a fucking lie.
Listen. Birds are like the most universally loved faction in the game, and most gameplay with them centers around making their way to keep them in check completely irrelevant. If you ask me, God of War birds, or like just not turmoiling birds, and Smol Mole are effectively the same level of bullshit. At least to me. A few other examples of this is Vagabond generally playing like an asshole, they were supposed to quest and they mostly kill, and Otter's export action. I'm sure that action was intended to be used. What I'm trying to say is, I'm not really concerned with if Smol Mole was intended. I only care if it's fun or not. I think I carry this attitude over from my speedrunner days. Was frame buffering in Super Monkey Ball intended? Probably not. Is this sick as hell? Does it make me look like a white boy with a little bit of sauce? You bet your ass it does. So the question to me really comes back around to, is Smol Mole fun?
Sorry, excuse me, 1 second. I need to find my one-time use contrarian ticket, and there it is. I knew I had it somewhere.
I actually think Smol Mole is pretty fun, even if it is a little bit cheesy. Hear me out. Please. Playing Smol Mole is essentially playing this faction naked. You're giving up a ton of resources and your entire ability to craft in order to dodge price of failure. To make up for this, if you're truly playing full Smol Mole the entire way through a game of Root by Cole Worley published by Leader Games, I think you have to be a bit more active on the board. The obvious callout here is taking cardboard off the table, but a decent chunk of the faction's tokens have high costs of removal, making this a bit more complicated. Sympathy costs you cards, which sometimes can be alleviated through just like not having a card of the suit you're interacting with. But this won't be the case all the time, and giving away cards without running a crypto scam on the side is gonna cost you quite a bit. Relics and face-down plots cost you in warriors. I know, like, Duchy should just run over Corvid, right? Like, you got fucking action economy to the 10th power and crows have jack shit. But, like, a face-down plot with one warrior can do a maximum of 4 damage with ambush.
So like if you're not starting a mole draft, that's a lot of actions recruiting that just went down the drain. Surely this has never happened to me. I'm not speaking from experience. I always dodge ambush. Don't worry about me, guys. You also have to manage your hand well for digging. A common Smol Mole strategy is to abandon clearings after you're done attacking. An observant table can clear out the tunnels left behind, costing you precious cards each turn, and possibly even choke you out of scoring Duchess of Mud. On Smol Mole, you have to pick and choose your battles carefully, as having only a few things go wrong can quickly make a game unplayable. So yeah, like, sue me guys, I don't know, I think Smol Mole can be fun in the right game with the right checks and balances. Also, as frustrating as it is to play against, I think it is really cool when moles leave one tunnel, go into the burrow, and then pop out another tunnel across the board. It's a really unique way of getting around the table, and I think it gives this faction a unique identity. All in all though, players have gotten pretty good at countering Smol Mole. In competitive play, it's pretty hard to actually pull off a full Smol Mole win, which makes me actually like it a little bit more. Like, yeah, I could move all my warriors back into the burrow and hide, but you could also just kill all my pieces on the board, and now I can't play the game, so...
Maturing is realizing that Smol Mole wasn't intended because, well, it kind of sucks, right? It's not very good. But don't fret. Smol Mole can still be pretty useful to us, especially with some newer developed strategies.
Every game you play as moles, you start small, and eventually you'll either get swole or become a class trader. Even the clockwork version of this faction gets at least 4 warriors in the burrow before moving them out and building. So the intent of Duchy to me feels like you're supposed to build up warriors in the burrow and then move them onto the board to build your fuck you clearing. Smol Mole is an important key to this strategy, which I think is pretty new and shiny, referred to as Smol to Swole, or as I call it, are we playing this faction as intended yet?
And last but not least, I'd like to bring up the biggest allegation brought against my clients, that they're an overbearing, overpowered fascist on the metagame of Root. And to that point, I must concede to the prosecution because god damn, my client is a unit, just a total animal.
You're not gonna catch me dead saying that moles aren't busted. They are definitely overpowered, but what I think is more important is how they are busted. Overpowered characters in games can either show you how sick that game's metagame is, or it can ruin the game forever.
생기고 스킬 속도가 빨라지고 그 다음에 공격력 개수가 있어가지고 W가
Take my favorite example, Super Smash Bros. Both Brawl and Smash 4 were absolutely ruined by their top tier characters. If you weren't playing Meta Knight or Bayonetta, you were at such an insane disadvantage that you might as well have just thrown a tantrum so you could have left your legacy in a GR Smash video.
That was horseshit!
In Melee, however, the game that's over 20 years old, the metagame is still evolving. Even though Fox is the best character in the game, with one of the best moves to ever be put in a video game, he still has unique weaknesses that allow the rest of the cast to kick his ass. Moles are like Fox. Moles' weaknesses allow other factions to shine, and I think that goes underappreciated. The moles have 2 major weaknesses players can exploit. The first, and most important part of countering moles, is to hit their hand. Moles need cards to sway and dig, and without markets, their card draw is doggy doo-doo dog shit. Here are the main ways you can attack Mole's hand. First of all, learn when you're on crow duty. If moles are picked before you and crows are in the draft, you pick crows and you extort moles turn 1 every time.
Your moral obligation to be on crow duty increases as you get closer to seat 1. I can forgive third seat with 4 options passing on crow duty, but if you're first seat and you're between crows and ranger, and you pick ranger, I'm gonna be peeved, bro. Extorting the moles effectively puts them a turn behind, and in a game that usually lasts 7 turns, that's a pretty big deal. Next up, Woodland Alliance players. Let's get some sympathy on the moles. Yeah, this can sometimes not work out super well due to moles just not having matching cards to the sympathy that you placed, but it can also sometimes be really annoying for the moles player if those cards do match the sympathy you placed. Next up, attack tunnels. Every time you take out a tunnel, it costs the mole player a card to replace it, so make sure you get rid of them. By the way, if you're a Vagabond player, and I catch you aiding the moles, we're gonna have a real problem. But if you're a thief, you can steal those cards, and that is really helpful. Last but not least, you want to swap meet these assholes as much as you can and just stock them up on bird cards. Moles hate bird cards until their last turn, so make sure to just pile them on there. As you can see, in general, the insurgent factions are really good at dealing with moles, which brings me to their second weakness to exploit.
Good thing about the strategy guide, it says right here, killing him is his weakness.
I know saying attack the faction is general advice you could use about any faction in Root, but moles have a uniquely difficult time returning to the board since they are recruited in the burrow. And it's not like moles have like 10 warriors in every clearing, right? They usually have one clearing with, you know, a handful of warriors and then a few other clearings with 1 or 2 warriors, right? And moles are even doing you the service of showing you what cards they're using to sway every turn. So targeting those key clearings with just 1 or 2 moles in them is totally doable.
Lizards are, of course, your hard mole counter, since they can zap mole buildings. But the less obvious, arguably stronger ability the lizards have is to zap the moles themselves. This works especially well in the early game when the moles don't have many warriors on the board. Since our vagabond friends shouldn't be aiding the moles, shooting some stray moles in the face should be no problem for them. Plus infamy, plus ratio. The militant factions in general should be keeping the moles in check, although some are definitely more useful than others. Rats are of course your main bullies, and they can start going after the moles whenever they want. Birdies or otters, even though otters aren't militant, but I don't know, they kind of are. They can also join in to be your hope late game to get through this if need be. False Orders also feels like it was made specifically to counter moles, so make sure that someone crafts it at some point in order to get through this if need be again. Last but not least, your goal when fighting moles should be to remove them from clearings completely. We want to be making sure that the mole player has to at least use actions inefficiently in order to continue swaying what they want. Overall, there are a lot of ways that moles' opponents can make the game a headache for them, and a lot of those ways are faction specific, which is something that I really appreciate about the moles. I think it's a lot more fun for players to coordinate their faction's bullshit together to take down the moles than, say, designating who's gonna hit Vagabond this turn. This distinction between the two factions is what makes moles a much more enjoyable table of villain faction to me. When you play Vagabond, half of the insurgent faction's powers are essentially nullified. On moles though, you're vulnerable to everything from every direction, and the more the table turns the heat up on you, the harder and more intricate your turns become. It's in these precarious positions that moles really shine due to how many tools they have at their disposal. The game becomes a positive feedback loop where the table tries to slow down the moles, and the mole player has to hatch a ridiculous plot to escape certain doom. It's in games like these where you'll feel like a villain, and I think that's a really charming and unique niche within the game, metagame, and even the Root community. I find it really compelling that the rich, snarky faction ended up being the best faction in the game, while simultaneously sitting at the bottom of the root social ladder. No one wants to talk deals with you while you're playing the moles. It's a real we don't negotiate with terrorists situation. I say this as a strength of the faction. Root is an asymmetric game, and if there's anything the godfather of asymmetry, Cosmic Encounter, has taught us, it's that power mechanically really has nothing on the power of the people playing the game. For those who don't know, some powers in Cosmic are completely game-breaking. I mean, they make moles look insanely balanced. But in Cosmic, you can overcome that through the power of friendship, and I think moles also encourage this kind of gameplay. All of this combined is what makes moles such a good, meta-defining, overpowered faction to me. They are able to be interacted with and cut down, but they have enough resources to overcome the obstacles put in front of them. They are seen as the best faction in the game, but that makes them have the least bidding chips socially. We take our hate of the moles for granted, and I for one am proud that my community's overpowered faction can create some really memorable games and stories.
On the charges of being overpowered, my client pleads guilty. It's up to you in the comments to come up with an appropriate punishment for them. But now, switching sides. That's right, I'm on the prosecution now, baby. Moles are at number 6, so I do have to talk a little bit of shit before this video ends, or I'm gonna lose all my subscribers. In the Woodland Warriors Discord server, in League chat specifically, how to fix moles is like maybe the 3rd most commonly discussed topic. So I've heard arguments from the sweatiest root players in the world, which has actually shifted my mind on this from what I originally thought the problems with moles were. Originally, this section of the video was just me shitting on Banker like the entire time, and while I still think Banker is problematic, I now think he's only one of the 4 horsemen of the Molepocalypse. The 4 horsemen of the Molepocalypse are an elite group of bullshit that create feelings of detest and anger from root players. But don't fret, I'm about to put these horsemen on the stand and try to come up with some plausible solutions to them. Now, like I always say, I don't think myself like a genius or anything, okay? I haven't playtested any of this. These are just suggestions. Take them as fan fiction. Root is my favorite game. I do not think of myself as like better than anyone involved in making it. I think it is beautiful, so I'm mostly here to entertain. Don't take this stuff too seriously.
The first horseman I'm gonna tackle is Banker, mostly because that's the one I've already revealed, and I still want there to be suspense as to what the other 3 horsemen are. You see, Banker's job is about to be replaced by AI, and he is sweating bullets. The stress breaks him, and he sells all of his stonks. Is it enough, though?
Honestly, it depends on how carefully you invested during the game, but often, yes, the stonks were more than enough.
Once a turn, you can activate Banker to discard any number of cards of the same suit from your hand. For each card you discarded this way, you score 1 point. With Otterbuys, it's possible to score a whopping 6 points in 1 turn without even having pieces on the board. Banker has always felt a little unfair to me. It's just completely shocking that a noble is able to score more in a single burst than a lord by essentially double. To drive this point even further, there are no other squires or nobles that have anything to do with scoring points. Only Banker, making him feel very awkwardly placed as a noble. My big issue with Banker is that he feels inevitable. There are a lot of Duchy games where you know that the moles are gonna win on their next turn through Banker. But since the board is powerless to do anything about Banker, Players just kind of end up twiddling their thumbs until the mole player cashes in their victory. Now here's the thing, moles don't really even need banker to win, let alone to hit a burst. There's plenty of ways to burst on moles without swaying banker. You can build 3 times on your turn, score that shit, craft coins, and sway and bang out a 7-point turn. But at least in this scenario, you have to plan ahead, have multiple of the right ministers and cards ready to go, and overall do some actual thinking instead of just throwing up cards all over the board for the W. In my opinion though, this makes the banker problem twofold, because now not only do you have to worry about the building mole burst, but you also have to worry about the banker mole burst. Having this many options to score upwards of 5 points is a luxury that really no other faction has, and leads to some really miserable endgames. Let's just say, hypothetically, the mole player has done the previously mentioned building turn. Even if you destroy a building and remove the minister that would allow them to score said building, you still have to worry about banker in the back, making the mole victory, you guessed it, inevitable. With all of that being said, I think changing banker is a bit tricky. The idea that I always come back around to is making banker a lord instead of a noble. I'd then be tempted to combine the 2 building scorers into a single lord to make room for banker. This new lord could be activated to score 2 points, as long as you had 2 buildings on the board, making it a bit more like Baron of Mud. The reason behind capping the scoring of buildings to 2 points a turn being the utility you gain from being able to score more than 1 building type in a single action. Say that fucking 10 times fast. God damn. Of course, in addition to the entire extra noble you'd be gaining in this scenario, which is even more utility.
Don't ask me what that noble does. I've never thought that far into this.
I feel like the scenario I just proposed is shoddy work at best. In a way, it feels like it could even be a buff to the moles instead of a nerf. There's other solutions I can think of too. You could simply remove banker and swap him out with something with a bit more utility. Maybe you add a noble that could take any of your daylight actions, which is a suggestion I've heard thrown around quite a bit. But in this scenario, moles would be able to recruit up to 4 warriors a turn, and dig up to 3 times, and build without builder. So any way you add utility, it's gonna get a little messy. You could potentially try simply removing a lord to make room for banker, but that would make one of the 2 building strategies significantly stronger than the other, or you just completely kill Smol Mole.
Which I know for some of you means it's the correct solution. But the truth is, I don't think there is a simple solution to the burden that banker places on the endgame of a game of Root. There is no way that you could remove or change banker without it trickling down to all of the other ministers in some way. I really do think that if you were to remove or change him, you'd also have to take a holistic look at every other minister as well, which is some way, somehow, outside the scope of this video, thank God. So, you know what, banker? You have made yourself too valuable to this company to fire you, and I gotta say, as a working class American, I can respect that. It's really heartwarming to see that in these trying times, we can find some common ground. So with that said, let's get on to the next Molehorse.
The second horseman of the Molepocalypse is the rate at which moles scale, which is lightning quick. Put on your seatbelt because we are getting a speeding ticket. To refer back to my League of Legends analogy from the start of this video, which feels like an entire odyssey ago, some champions in League are basically unplayable until the game timer hits like maybe 25 minutes. There's a champion in League that doesn't become her full form until level 16. You can only hit level 18 in a single game of League of Legends, guys. I know we can't compare League to Root 1 for obvious reasons, but you can kind of see this in Root in its own way. Woodland is the best example of this. The Alliance is represented by 1 to 3 sympathy tokens at the start of the game. Thematically, they haven't even shown up yet, just the representation of people being sympathetic to their cause has. They score slowly throughout the game, but once they hit that 13 to 15 point range, they're usually quite strong. They've pulled off a few revolts, and now they can spread their message freely, allowing them to score crazy bursts in a single turn. Woodland starts the game almost invisible and ends it in a dramatic, bursting fashion. Moles are not even remotely close to resembling anything close to this. They start well established on the board with a whopping 7 warrior setup, which if you ask me is probably like 2 warriors too many. First of all, thematically, I think this is weird because I thought the Duchy have been looking above ground for years looking for expansion, but I don't know, it looks like they're well established here to me. Now, I don't expect them to have 0 warriors on the board to start, that would be silly, but like, why do they have more than rats, whose entire gimmick is that there are a lot of them? I don't think this would be such a big issue if the burrow wasn't so powerful. Having this many pieces to start and an invincible clearing can lead to some cheese in the early game. Once you sway Brigadier, if no one has messed with you yet, you can just stash your extra warriors away for safekeeping, creating a ton of early momentum for you. And this momentum picks up steam quickly. I mean, seriously, you spend 1 turn having a worse action economy than Marquise before having an action economy that looks like a fighting game character's moveset, while simultaneously always being able to keep up in scoring, which is the real gut punch here, right? Like, they don't even score slowly. Moles are a scaling faction, but they start scaling from already pretty good instead of doggy doo-doo dog shit. Moles turn 1 is a great example of this. They gain 2 extra actions and pick up 2 points when they sway Brigadier. Gaining 2 points while essentially doubling your action economy on turn 1 is pretty much unheard of for any other faction. Birdies usually are only scoring a single point on their first turn by putting down a single roost, and they certainly don't scale in points as well as the moles. Badgers, a faction known for their bursts, sometimes don't even score on their first turn. They'll often put a bigger emphasis on building up their action economy. Otter shopkeepers will commonly open the game by only drawing cards in order to build up their action economy as well. Moles have a unique luxury in not having to choose between scoring and gaining more actions, since they get the 2-for-1 mega deal known as swaying.
You also have to take into consideration that moles are basically playing on creative mode. I mean, like, they can literally teleport across the map, so any extra scaling they are getting, you're really feeling.
I think the easiest way to make moles shittier is to attack how many points they have access to on their board. Through swaying, moles have access to the same amount of points as otters on their board, 18 total points. At first glance, this seems fine and fair until you realize that moles have like 4 extra axes of scoring through their ministers, right? So in reality, moles have access to like N something more points than otters. I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm not really like a math guy. I hypothesize a fair change to try might be to make nobles and lords 1 less point when you sway them. You'd then have access to 12 points on your mole board instead of 18. I think this would be a nicer change than just making all ministers 1 less point when you sway them, because if you make squires worth 0 points, we're getting down to 9 total points on the mole board, which could be overkill.
While I don't think that this would completely fix all of the pacing issues with moles, I do think it's the path of least resistance.
We don't have to change anything fundamentally with the faction, which is ideal. I will say though, if there's one faction in the game that goes over 30 points consistently when they win, it's moles. So I think we can take a few points away from them and have it be okay. So with that, let's get to the next Molehorse. Nay!
The third Molehorse is what I'd like to call winning in the margins. Winning in the margins is basically all of the little rules on moles that at first glance make you say,
I mean, surely it doesn't work like that, right? I mean, that would be a bit ridiculous.
the biggest offender of winning in the margins is cardboard counting for swaying. The fact that you can just leave a tunnel in a random clearing and the lobbyists are totally cool with that is beyond me. I feel like this should be at least warriors. I don't think you should have to rule a clearing to sway, but having a warrior there at a minimum seems reasonable, I think. Another example of winning in the margins is how Price of Failure works. Price of Failure only procs on losing buildings, so if you lose 2 buildings in a single battle, you only lose a single minister and a single card. I actually believe that only losing a single minister in this situation is totally fine. If you were to actually lose 2 ministers when you lost 2 buildings, I'm not sure you could recover from that. Like, that is GG's, wrap it up, boys. But only losing 1 card during, like, that scenario where you lose 2 buildings is so annoying. Most of the time you're blowing up buildings, you're desperate. You're desperate. You're trying to prevent the mole win. But if they have Banker in the back, like I talked about earlier, they'll still have a burst on their next turn. I'd be curious to see how much it would hurt moles if they lost cards equal to how many buildings they lost during Price of Failure instead of how it currently works. It's another small but subtle change that I think could potentially help with the moles' crazy rubber banding. Last and least, I was kind of surprised when I found out bird cards counted as wild cards for Banker. I mean, there's nothing stated on Banker or any other bird interaction in the game that would make me believe otherwise, but more so, I was surprised that it was allowed, to be completely honest. I was just like, this shit is really legal? Like, I'm allowed to do this?
He can't keep getting away with it!
I think it'd be nice if bird cards didn't count as a wild suit, or maybe couldn't be used at all for Banker. After all, whenever you'd reveal cards as moles anyway, you discard them instead of bringing them back into your hand at the end of your turn. So having birds be weaker for the duchy kind of already tracks.
Those were just a few off the top of my head, like the main ones that come to mind. I think if you really dug, you could think of more. One that was removed from this list was being able to dig without moving any warriors into the burrow that you dug into. You can't actually do that. That's illegal, although I still think you can do it in digital, which is kind of messed up, but I guess it is what it is. So let's get on to the final Molehorse. Yay! Nay!
The final Molehorse is my script editor, Jake. Shoutouts to Jake, who had me condense this last Molehorse, which was originally moles starting with too many pieces on the board, into the script for Molehorse 2, which, you know, if we recall, was the duchy's rate of scaling. Great Molehorse, by the way. But yeah, I was way too deep into this shit to just get rid of this bit. So yeah, shoutouts to Jake for making this script coherent.
Here are my final words to you, the viewer, and the jury about my client and I guess also my plaintiff. What makes a root faction well or poorly designed to you? Why do you really like the factions that you like, and why do you hate the ones that you hate? The moles are generally viewed unfavorably in the root community, and I think that's okay. Root is an asymmetric game, and one faction is going to end up being the strongest. It just happened to be the moles. Combine that with the fact that they can camp in their burrow and boom, you got a community villain. But just because in the root ancient texts, the moles were not looked upon super favorably, doesn't mean that moles are poorly designed. In my opinion, the moles are a pretty incredible design that just obviously goes too far in a few places. I really think the core of swaying is a dynamic and layered design that keeps the moles honest. Revealing cards is such a little subtle way to give players enough information to fight back against the moles, right? If I reveal coins 3 or 4 turns in a row, and then I have my burst build turn where I craft coins and score my buildings and whatever the fuck, you can't be surprised! Like, I just showed you I had coins for 3 turns in a row. Like, what did you expect me to do with those? I really do think just that little hook of revealing cards and having pieces on the board is enough to really interconnect moles into Root's metagame. Every other faction has enough information and utility to deal with moles in their own unique way, while moles have, like, maybe too deep of a bucket of bullshit to fight against that pushback. At the end of the day, I will always appreciate the moles for being a villain faction, even if they aren't perfect. It can be frustrating to play against them, but that makes toppling them feel even more satisfying. It can feel claustrophobic to play them in a 3v1, but that makes winning on them feel even more satisfying and freeing. The moles are highly variable monsters, but I couldn't imagine Root without them. I rest my case. Oh my god. This video is long as shit.